to our Advocacy Day for Vermont, New Hampshire. I'm Dan Yeager. I'm the Executive Director of NEMA, and I'm really happy that you're with us today. We've been at this all week, spreading the news about museums to our legislators in our various New England states, and we've had a good turnout and a lot of energy, and I'm sure we will hear it as well today. So I'm really glad and grateful that you're here. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the places in which we gather. In this era of virtual meetings, when digital spaces may substitute our physical sense of place, it's important to reflect on the land we each occupy and honor the indigenous people who have called it home. I today am speaking to you from Swampscott, Massachusetts, just north of Boston, the historical homelands of the Massachusetts peoples. Wherever we are, let us acknowledge all indigenous nations as living communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. We here at NEMA recognize that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society that perpetuated the exclusions and erasures of many native peoples throughout the United States and beyond. So we ask you to reflect on the place where you reside and work, and to respect the diversity of cultures and experiences that form the richness of our world and our profession. So thanks very much for that. Appreciate it. We're a small group. Why don't we do a quick go around and see who's in the audience here and where you're calling in from, just very briefly. And I'll start with our participants, and then we'll wind up back with Meg to introduce our speakers, okay? And I'm going to call, let's see, shall we do age first? And then, I don't know, I'll call it Charlie Brown.
You're treading on territory, Dan. Careful.
Board member emeritus and Lifetime Achievement Award winner from NEMA, and way up there in, where are you? St. Albans or wherever it is, Vermont.
Oh,
so,
Dan, you're going to be in trouble now.
Bungling it already. I blew it with the anyway. Charlie, where are you calling in from?
You got to unmute.
Right, Charlie, your loquaciousness is being muted, so there you
go. I'm calling in to support the Old Stonehouse Museum, which is in Brownington, Vermont. Lovely, beautiful place. And I have served on the board, but I just stepped off the board, and so I'm a little out of shape here, and that's why I'm off the board. Actually, some of you probably are aware that I have some health problems, but anyway, yeah, I spent a long time running the Fairbanks Museum, in St. Johnsbury, and it's still functioning very well now that I'm not there. Probably because I'm not there. Let's put it that way.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to see you again. Okay, Liz. I see you, Liz. Where are you calling in from?
Hi, I apologize. I missed the very first bit. I'm in it's a shared office. I work in the planning office in Watertown, Massachusetts, but I'm also the president of the Government Arts Council, and many of our members, well, a couple of our members are local museums in the Southern Lakes region.
Thank you. Phelan.
I'm Phelan Fritz. I'm director of ECHO Leahy Center for Lake Champlain in Burlington, Vermont. Nice to see everybody.
Well, thanks. Hey, Heidi.
Hi, I'm Heidi Duncanson. I work as the communications coordinator for the Seacoast Science Center. I'm coming to you. Friday is my work at home day. We're all still sort of shuffling. I'm in a shared office, so we've all been trying to alternate who's in the office when. So Friday is my lucky day to work at home. So I'm joining you from here. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, Dennis.
Hello, Dennis Waring. I am representing the SD Organ Factory in Brattleboro, Vermont.
Yeah, terrific place. Okay, I see a few people off screen. Oh, there we go. Natalie, and if you don't feel comfortable, by the way, being on screen, you can just drop your info into the chat as well. Hey, Natalie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Natalie Newell, representing the Friends of Benson Park in Hudson, New Hampshire, and will be the home of the future Benson's Wild Animal Farm Museum.
Good.
It's nice to be here.
Good. Great to have you. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer Carroll. I'm with the Historical Society of Cheshire County in Keene, New Hampshire.
Good. And I see Kathleen. you're not with us, you can just drop your info into the chat. And we've got Peter as well. If you want to just say hi in the chat, that'd be great. And let's see who's left. Heather, why don't you say hi?
Hi, I'm Heather Riggs with NEMA.
Good that your audio is working again.
Yeah, I had to start the other computer.
That's, I think, everybody that's a non-speaker. I'm going to turn it over to Meg to get the proceedings going, noting that Christopher's on a time frame. It's got to go. So anyway, Meg, over to you.
Yep, that's right. We're gonna mix up the flow of things this morning to make sure we're watching it for everybody's time commitments. So normally I start off with some advocacy tips and tricks, but I think we're gonna just flip it around this time to make sure everybody has a chance to share what they need to. So we will instead wrap up with my recommendations of all of the cool things you can do with the information that Christopher and Michael and Agnes are going to share with you first. So I want to say thank you so much to our fabulous collaborators and partners here at the New Hampshire and Vermont Humanities Councils. You guys are awesome for being here this morning. And thank you to all of you showing up to participate in New England Museum Week, because as Kate McBrien, the Maine State Archivist, mentioned back on Monday, 90% of advocacy is just caring enough to show up. So thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I am first going to turn the floor over to Christopher to let us know what's up in Vermont that you all should know about.
All right, I'm not muted. It seems like I always start being muted. So again, my name is Christopher. I am coming to you from Montpelier, Vermont, where I live and work on the unceded lands of the Abenaki people. Our organization is the state affiliate of both the National Endowment for the Humanities as well as the Library of Congress as the Vermont Center for the Book. And we work primarily within the political boundaries of Vermont, but we also have the ability to work with folks working in the Abenaki tribes outside of the traditional political boundaries of Vermont set back in 1791. So I'm here to tell you a couple of things about what's happening in the Vermont legislature right now. But first, I want to make sure that folks know that we do have a grant application deadline coming up for project grants on April 15th. We encourage you, if you are in Vermont, doing work in Vermont or doing work on Abenaki projects on Abenaki lands, that you consider applying for funding. We've greatly increased our grant making over the last several years, and we'd love to see applications from all of you in the room. So please do consider that. I am jumping on this morning with exciting news. We have been working in partnership with the Vermont Arts Council throughout this legislative session to advocate for the Vermont Creative Futures Act, which would support museums' continued recovery from the pandemic, with advocacy for a $17.5 million ask. We're working with the amazing Downs, Racklin, and Martin, based up in St. Johnsbury and Charlie's neck of the woods, to help us with that advocacy. And last night, the bill actually passed out of the Vermont House Appropriations Committee, and that's really a very big deal. It would be the largest investment the state has ever made in arts and culture organizations if it gets all the way through the process and is signed into law by Governor Phil Scott. We could certainly use your help on it. I want to very briefly go over what's in the Vermont Creative Futures Act, and then I'll put a link to the advocacy page on our website in the chat so that you can remind yourselves of it later. But this recovery package, as it passed out of House Appropriations yesterday, is H624. It includes $10 million in creative economy grants for organizations and businesses that sustained substantial losses due to COVID or who continue to operate at a limited capacity due to COVID. Those are grants. They do not need to be repaid. It also includes $4 million to help nonprofit cultural organizations with facility adaptations. Many of you are operating in historic buildings, for example, and you might need significant updates to live in the post-pandemic world, including air purification systems, hand sanitizer dispensers, new HVAC systems, or to expand outdoor opportunities at your museum. There would be $4 million in grants available for that if the bill passed. There would be $2 million in transitional funding available to implement safe public programming, such as touchless ticketing, online sales, and other COVID-related health and safety protocols that will still need to be in place over the coming couple of years. And then there's a few other things that are not directly COVID-related, but are important. There'll be $750,000 in the bill for creative spaces grants, which would help revitalize vacant retail or office spaces through art and culture. For example, you could work with your community to present an exhibit on the main street in your town in a vacant space, or have an artist in residence working in a vacant space in your downtown. These grants would provide rental income to landlords while enabling artists, creative businesses, cultural projects to thrive, spark energy in local downtowns and villages around the state of Vermont. There would be a $500,000 investment in statewide and regional marketing of cultural events as part of this bill, and then $250,000 to sustain and build the Vermont Creative Network in order to implement our strategic plan. It's called the Create Vermont Action Plan, and it involves both arts organizations, nonprofits, businesses, and cultural organizations like ours are all part of the Create Vermont Action Plan. I'll put that link in the chat as well. We're really delighted that the bill has passed out of House Appropriations. That means it will be up for a floor vote in the House on Tuesday. It will make the crossover deadline in Vermont for money bills. It's a total of $17.5 million, which again would be the biggest investment in the cultural sector that the state of Vermont has ever made. It's sponsored by Representative Stephanie Jerome. There's a lot of co-sponsors from all three parties, which has been great. There is a companion bill in the Senate that has also passed, although it was changed really, really significantly on the Senate side. And the funding was actually moved over to VITA and turned into forgivable loans, much like the payroll protection program loans that many of you may have gotten back in the early days of the pandemic. Of course, we are advocating for the House version of the bill, which would be straight up grants assistance rather than forgivable loans. And we might at some point encourage NEMA members in Vermont to call or write senators to ask them to adopt the House version instead of the Senate version in the next 6 weeks or so. In the meanwhile, what we're asking Vermont museums to do right now, and I'll get this to Dan and the other folks at NEMA, is to sign on to a thank you letter to the Chair of House Appropriations, as well as the Chair of House Commerce, which also passed this bill with a unanimous vote earlier in the week. It would be very helpful to get as many signatures from Vermont cultural organizations as possible on those thank you letters. We'll also be sending a letter to the President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Becca Balint, asking her to support adoption of the House version of the bill. So we'd ask for your signatures on that too. I'll get that to us, those two letters off to Dan probably early in the week next week. And if he can pass them around and you all can report back to me if you're willing to sign on to those thank you letters, that would be awesome. So that is what I have to report on Vermont advocacy right now. I'm happy to turn it over to the next speaker or answer questions that people might have. It's pretty exciting. It's actually the first time that Vermont Humanities has worked with the Arts Council to hire a lobbying firm in about 25 years. And it obviously makes a huge difference to have Patty Comline as our particular lobbyist working in the House. And I also want to give huge props to the Arts Council, and especially Karen Middleman, who has been spending most of her time for many, many weeks following this work through the state legislature. So collaboration works. I encourage you all to engage in it as often as possible. And thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions for a few minutes. I'll stay on the call for 15 more minutes until I have to jump off to meet with our new state librarian.
Okay. Thank you so much, Christopher. And Michael, I agree with you. If anybody has questions for Christopher, since he does have to leave for a 10 o'clock meeting, we should go ahead and try to focus on those now. please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or if you're more comfortable, go ahead and type it in the chat too, and we're happy to bounce questions back aloud for folks.
Or thinking
From the NEMA side, Christopher, we are happy to go ahead and rebroadcast anything you send us. So
Awesome.
we will keep an eye out for your email.
Just also going to say, thanks, Meg, for that. That this notion of humanities and arts working together, what's interesting is that we still treat it as though it's a special moment in time, but we're really certainly encouraging that more and more because of course the museum field as a whole falls in this sort of strange place in the Venn diagram of all of these different agencies, and we always find that typically when we talk about creative economy and so forth, many of our history museums do not feel, or science or whatever, don't typically feel part of the creative economy per se. And yet, we're trying to convince people that that includes the entire cultural sphere, including, STEM types of museums like Phelan's and so forth. And so anyway, the collaboration is just so important, and I really applaud you for doing it. And obviously it bears fruit then with the public support. So congratulations on that, Christopher.
Thanks. And there's a long way to go before we get to the governor's signature, and probably a number of opportunities for folks to get involved. So we'll keep Dan and others posted. I should also mention that we do have it's not exactly a listserv, but a list of Vermont cultural leaders that we send these updates to. And if you're not on it and you would like to be on it, please send me a note and I will add you to it. There's generally been kind of town hall meetings every 4 to 6 weeks that we invite everybody on that list to. The last one was a couple weeks ago with Peter Welch was there. We did a fishbowl roundtable kind of thing for him about continuing needs in the cultural sector. So if you'd like to be on that list, let me know. I'll put my email address in the chat, as well as those 2 links are there already.
Is there anybody else who had questions or thoughts to share about cool and exciting things happening in Vermont? Okay, in that case, I guess it's over to you, Michael.
Thank you much. And it's interesting. It's really hard to follow up with what Christopher is talking about, because those of you in New Hampshire already know that we are not seeing a large groundswell of unified support going to the governor's office around any of these things at the moment, which is probably why when I was thinking about what we could contribute to the conversation, it was a little bit more based off of kind of more generalized, vague kind of concepts of what's going on. Like Christopher's group in Vermont, we are one of the 50+ affiliated with NEH groups, nonprofits for the New Hampshire kind of flavor of that. And what you'll quickly learn, even states like Vermont and New Hampshire, there's quite a big difference between kind of the ways that we can approach what's going on in our states because of whatever is going on locally at the time. So if any of you have been tuning into what's going on in Connecticut or Massachusetts, that's going to be a different story yet again. What I can say, I think about, and we're also, and Christopher, I'm sure was just doing this as well, we're coming out of Humanities on the Hill, where we've been talking to our state representatives about how do we make sure that the National Endowment of Humanities is getting the support it needs. So we're thinking about advocacy in kind of these larger terms. And some of that is going to relate to kind of what is the funding that's coming in through our organization and out to organizations like yours in our states. Agnes can talk a little bit about that. Agnes is our Director of Programs and Granting, and she'll be able to kind of talk a little bit about how that's been important in the past and how you can talk about why that's important in the future. And also, we do have some grant deadlines coming up that we want to make sure we get a plug in for as well, because this is an opportunity to kind of mention that to all of you, that there's some really good opportunities coming up. So I'll let her do that. But when I think about what kind of conversations are going on that we should be paying attention to, I think for New Hampshire, there are a couple of things that are going on that are important. And whether these are direct advocacy pieces or just pieces of the larger state puzzle, I don't really know how that fits in, but I think it's worth talking about. One is that one of the things that some of you might be more connected into than we are is the 400th anniversary of European contact in what is now considered the state of New Hampshire. There's a lot of that conversation going on the Seacoast. I would compare that also to the discussion that's going on around the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence that's coming up in 2026. Jean Shaheen, senator from New Hampshire, is on the semi-quincentennial committee that's been going on for quite some time. And so as this discussion is happening around the country and in the state, it's going to be one of the areas that there's going to be opportunities for support of cultural organizations across the state. And it's something that the AASLH has been really encouraging historical organizations and historians and other groups to really take a part in these conversations. I think the concern that they've outlined is that it would be very easy for these conversations to become a very simple way of celebrating the country without actually discussing any of the complexity around those events. And so participation in those kinds of things is something that is really, really important. And so one of the things we're tracking is that there is a bill that was just discussed a few days ago, I think, or maybe it was last week, to create a 250th anniversary commission here in New Hampshire. I did email with Senator David Waters about that. He's a former board member who's on the sponsoring committee for that. And of course, he had no information, and really it doesn't sound like he's expecting a lot to come of it. Again, I don't know how these things will shape up within our state, but these are kind of important conversations for all of us to think about being part of, and are places where I think advocacy for thinking about these things in different ways will be really, really important in the next couple of years. Also of note, I think one of the things that is confusing, I'm looking at the people from New Hampshire on this call, for example, and a lot of you are coming from a science background. Obviously, New Hampshire Humanities is a humanities organization, but one of the things we were really able to do, for example, around the American Rescue Plan, which is something that Agnes and I think we'll talk about more, as federal humanities funding came into the state, we were the place we were distributing that out to as many humanities organizations and programs as possible. And while that does not necessarily directly apply to science centers and things like that, we were able to support collaborative projects that had a humanities basis, but were touching on themes like science. So there is interesting opportunity for overlap, like Christopher was saying, and thinking about ways that the different areas can really support and strengthen the work that's going on in different areas is something that I think we should all be considering as well. Looking through my notes, I think that was everything except for the fact that I should also say it's exciting to be on the call with Nima. I am very, very new to being here in New Hampshire. I spent several lifetimes at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., so the museum community is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and something I'm hoping to learn more about in terms of everything happening in New Hampshire. So I think the last thought I had was just to keep the door open. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have worked with us before, then that's great. But even if you haven't, we'd love to just make that connection and think about how we can continue to support the work that's going on. With that, I will turn it over to you, Agnes.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, hi, I'm Agnes Burt. I run the grants and programs at New Hampshire Humanities. And I can share more information about our grants programs and some of the upcoming deadlines in a second, but I would think broadly, if you're applying for one of our grants, or you receive a grant, or you participate in one of our programs, all of our funding comes from either the National Endowment for the Humanities or is through private donations. So in thinking about advocacy, understanding the impact of that money coming to your organization is incredibly important for us to be able to articulate to, at the federal level, how the money is being used, what impact it's having on the state, and at a local level to be able to articulate to potential donors, so they can understand if they make a donation, this is what their money is being used to support. So if you receive a grant from us, we ask that you write a letter to the legislature, to the congressional delegation, explaining that you received funding from us, that this was through the National Endowment for the Humanities, and to talk about the impact for your organization. And for any program that we run or any grant, we'd also ask that you, include our logo and acknowledge us as a source of support, because raising awareness about New Hampshire humanities, insofar as we are a conduit for federal funding to be trickled down throughout the state, it's also very important for people to know that we exist so that we can continue to articulate our role to the federal government. And when we were thinking about impact, we just met with all the delegates or their staffers and Humanities on the Hill last week. The weeks are running together, but I think it was last week. And what we found is that I think people like to hear about what they can run on. So when we were discussing the SHARP grants with them, all the representatives seemed particularly interested in stories where they could be able to come back and say, we helped fund this project. I think less of a focus on necessarily the ideas that people might have come away with, and more on sort of concrete stories. So I shared a story about the Hampstead Public Library received SHARP funding, and they used it to build a story walk, which is take apart sections of a book and put it along a walking path, and people can go read the book with their family. And the Hampstead Public Library mentioned that they had bought snowshoes, and so that they could use this. People could participate in this throughout the winter months, even when it was snowing. And that got a lot of enthusiastic reception from the staffers. They all loved the image of families walking around reading a book in the snow. That seemed like something really concrete that they could, use to demonstrate impact. They were really interested in stories about number of jobs that were created through SHARP funds, or the number of jobs that were preserved. All those points that, they want to be able to come back and say concretely how this funding is being used in the state, what this trickle down effect is. And so when you're providing us with information, or talking to other people, providing information about those sorts of either concrete detailed stories, or the ways that a particular source of funding helped your organization, also helps us then articulate to the federal representatives what they're, that they should continue to keep funding the NEH, because the money is being put to good use down here at a local level.
Can I add something to that, Agnes?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's really important for people to think big, right? And present your dreams. The New England Humanities Council directors last year in the congressional budget process published an op-ed in newspapers in every state in New England asking for the National Endowment for the Humanities appropriation to be raised to the same level adjusted for inflation as it was at in 1992, which was the peak of NEH funding, at about the same time that the attacks on the National Endowment for the Arts were happening, when everything was cut. And although we didn't get that, we did get the largest increase in NEH and NEA funding in a really long time. I don't know exactly how long, but we did end up with about a 7 or 8% increase in funding, which will make a measurable difference in New Hampshire and Vermont in terms of the amount of resources we have available.
To also build off something that Michael just mentioned, as a Humanities Council, we have to fund humanities-based projects. We have our biggest grant program is our Community Project Grant Program. There we have 2 different grant opportunities. The difference between them is basically the funding level. A mini grant is up to $2,000, and we accept applications on a rolling basis. Our major grants are up to $10,000, and those are accepted quarterly. I'll share information with Meg after about access to the website and upcoming deadlines. The next round for major grant applications would be a June 15th draft deadline, and then a final draft is due a month later. But the projects have to be based in a humanities field, but we really love to see interdisciplinary projects. So even if you're not a historic history museum or a clear humanities-based organization, we have funded organizations that are doing interdisciplinary work. So last year, I think actually maybe it was through this presentation, my colleague had presented, and then the Sea Science Center in Manchester contacted us, and they're working on an oral history project with the Manchester Historic Association to collect oral histories about people that are working in the tech sector in Manchester currently, and the idea being to connect it to Manchester's much longer history and its role in the Industrial Revolution, and think about Manchester, as a place with a long history of technological innovation, but really merging the science-based interests of the Sea Science Center with a historical perspective. And that was a really exciting grant for us to be able to award. So don't feel discouraged if you're a science organization. We absolutely love to see interdisciplinary projects in all of our applications. We also have another grant opportunity coming up at the end. Well, the application is open now. The deadline is March 31st, but please don't feel discouraged. If you have an idea that you think might fit for this, please feel free to reach out to me. This is our Spring 22 Focus Grant, and Focus Grants we designed to provide funding for programs on a specific topic or subject that we've selected, that we've identified as something particularly worth discussing. So this year's Focus Grant is focused on funding projects that support the idea of what it means to be a more perfect union or an informed citizen and a democracy. This is coming out of a particular funding stream from the NEH. We're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and there's a lot of money coming out of the NEH right now to try to create a drumbeat for the upcoming celebrations. And so we received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities that is now being re-granted out to people in the state to develop their own public humanities projects on this theme of what it means to be a more perfect union. So those grant applications are due March 31st. We recognize that's a pretty close deadline. If you have something that you think might be of interest to this project, don't be discouraged by the deadline. Please just reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat, and I'm happy to talk to you and help you with your project. Our goal with that is to fund as many organizations as possible across the state to raise awareness about this initiative. And I don't think I have anything else. I'm happy to answer more questions about our grants programs or any of our other programs that organizations can book. We often pay the speaker fee for our speakers bureau. We pay the speaker fee, and an organization can bring a speaker directly to their organization to present. So it's intended to provide a low-cost way for organizations to also, build community in their own at their own locations. I'm happy to answer any other questions about those as well.
Thank you so much, Michael and Agnes. That was lots of great information. Really, really appreciate your being here today. And again, thank you to everybody else for showing up. We're really glad to see your faces here as well. If anybody has any questions for Michael or Agnes, please feel free to, again, unmute yourself or drop them in the chat, either way. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
I just, first of all, want to say thank you guys, because you've done so much to help our organization, and probably every organization I've worked in New Hampshire through the Humanities to Go, and I think the Quick Grants have helped fund teacher workshops for us for 20 years now going on in Keene. But a question I have, out of many of those grants and workshops have it's helped us build educational resources that we can lend out to schools for free. In recent years, a lot of that is centered around civil rights, issues around race and such. The last one was Empowered Women. And now we have our Badass Women of Keene walking tour we do, and we focus on women's suffrage. And I have this growing fear that the schools in our region won't try to access this information anymore with the all these issues around the divisive concepts. And I wonder how other museums in New Hampshire are handling this or thinking about these kinds of issues, and if there's any concerted effort to just see that maybe we can help leverage what others are trying to do to stop this from expanding any further.
I think it's a great question. I'm going to jump in for a second, and I'll let Agnes think for a second, because it makes me really immediately think of one of the other things from the AASLH was a really great new initiative that they launched maybe a month ago on reframing history. And while it is not specifically about divisive concepts and CRT, it's very much about how do we reframe the conversations that are going on about history right now. And if you haven't already seen that, that is a really good resource about what is the conversation about history that we really want to be having, rather than the conversation that we're getting at the moment. So that's one thing that I would definitely recommend to anybody who is thinking about this. One of our other board members is Elizabeth DeBrule, who is at New Hampshire State Historical, and she is really big on civics education right now. And I think what I've learned from what little opportunity I've had to learn from Elizabeth, what she seems to be really suggesting is that there's an agreement that we need civics education. There's a disagreement about what that means. And so I think part of the question is how do we really define a lot of what we're doing within civics education in a way that actually helps provide the structure that gets out of this divisive concepts question and into, like, what does civics education look like in the state and how do we support that in the schools? Elizabeth has a great line that I'm not going to get quite right, but about the fact that there's this whole worry with divisive concepts that kids are being taught the wrong things about civics in schools, but the reality is they're not being taught anything in schools. And how do we talk about that as a state rather than what we fear is being taught? Sorry, Elizabeth's so much better at talking about this than I am, but I think that's very much the conversation. And you're totally right. We need to be doing more together. There is a lot of conversation going on around civics in the state, not only with Elizabeth and the Historical Society, State Historical Society, but also New Hampshire Civics, which you probably have already also bumped into because it's a pretty vocal group. But I think there's a lot of effort to try to pull together around civics education within schools, but then the question of also how do we flip that into outside of schools as well. We need to be talking to the entire population. That's something I think our angle on that is about supporting that as well. Sorry, Agnes, did you have other more useful stuff to describe? I just wanted to jump in with.
No, I think that, yeah, it's something that honestly we're still trying to figure out too, is like walking a line, between continuing to do high quality programs and, talk about important subjects and promote learning while navigating whatever, is meant by divisive concepts. Because we also are technically not supposed to formally endorse a policy as a federally funded organization. How navigating how you speak out or how you draw that line between what's formal advocacy and also just articulating the value and the importance of education and humanities education in schools, I think is something that we're still trying to figure out how to navigate as well. I think another area in the schools, and actually, Jenna, I think someone told me that you do work in the schools, but an area where we are trying to learn more about is like, how can we be involved in the schools in New Hampshire, given the scarcity of funding for social studies education across the state? Like, what is the need? Yeah. Besides social studies education, what is the need? What's the gap that we can be filling? And if we are providing all of these resources for teachers, how do they have the time in the day to actually use them? What is useful for them to receive? Now, we don't want to just create a volume of stuff and teachers are like, this is awesome, but like, this isn't going to work in my 30-minute time slot. So there's a lot of areas there too, where I think we are still trying to work that out ourselves, which is to say it's a learning process for everyone at this point.
Yeah, and I think, faced with the fact that over the last couple of decades, we've had a decrease in traditional field trips to history museums. We have been exceptionally busy with getting primary sources into the classroom and having students come and work with primary sources on site. And I teach a place-based social studies class at Antioch, and doing all of that work now, that's if that's at risk, like where do we stand with the work that we can be doing with schools? Because I am already seeing that there are teachers that we may have worked with that won't are a little bit afraid to work with us now on projects that we were doing before around Jonathan Daniels, who's from Keene, and his role in the civil rights movement, for instance. So it's definitely hot on it's on our minds all the time. Yeah, I'd love to see. Yeah, and I'll talk to Elizabeth too. I think that's a great idea. We don't specifically teach civics. You know, we're focused on all these other topics, but obviously maybe working together, it would be great to see something that we can be doing. Yeah, thank you.
But let's keep talking about it, absolutely, because yeah, there's a lot to figure out, and coherent strategy from all of us would be, you know, a good start. So,
thank you.
Anybody wants to talk to me about hosting a town hall on a topic around such key issues, feel free to email me and we can try to make that happen so that we can also loop in some brain power from the rest of the region as well to try to help out. All right.
Can I amplify that, Meg? Because I was just going to point out to Jen and everybody else on the call, this is a huge issue for us at NEMA, you know, just sort of the hidden histories and controversial histories and whatever, which we are in that moment of exploring. And, you know, so we do have, Meg, you dropped in some resources that we have on that. We have been doing some town halls and, you know, so forth. And I think we've got some recordings of those. But the other thing I was going to mention is that there's a, you know, huge sort of support group of people that are your, you know, colleagues that, you know, it's always helpful to sort of compare notes and to really team up with folks that you know and trust. And I'm thinking, Jen, in your particular area, I don't know if you know Sophia Thornblad from the Horatio Colony Museum, but she's really vitally interested in this area. And I'd encourage you to team up with her, for example, and just like what's going on there. And can you, you know, create some synergy? And, you know, I'm thinking some of our own affinity groups and whatever. So we're always happy to help plug people in around these particular issues too, because it helps to know that you're not alone in these things, especially when, you know, you're potentially pushing a big rock up a hill.
You know, actually not museums, but another thing in the Keene area, I don't know if you work with the people over at the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program at Keene, but they had I had a very similar conversation with Tom White about how much the teachers that they were training were having that hesitancy.
He's a fantastic advocate. Yeah, it's great.
To Dan's part, voice just now, I would echo that, because Vermont had an organization called the Vermont Museum and Gallery Association, and these were people from all different disciplines, science, humanities, arts. And it was great to be working together. It was an organization that met quite frequently, and the leadership in all of those organizations, including profitable galleries. And so it was really more about how we think about presenting, how we think about what concepts are behind us if we're working in a museum. And that is what NEMA is terrific about. And Vermont Museum, Gallery, and Alliance kind of died. So glad to have NEMA.
Thank you very much. And so I did have a question for you all. I do have a bit of an overview that I can share with you about sort of taking the information that Christopher and Agnes and Michael have all shared with us today and where to go from here. So if that's helpful for people, I will go ahead and do that. If people feel like I got this down and I don't need a review of what nonprofits can and cannot say advocacy wise on social media, et cetera, then, you know, at this point, you don't have to stick around. I will just remind you that if you are going to be posting on social media, please use the hashtag Newing Museum Week so that we can see what you've been up to and we can boost it and we can also track engagement, et cetera, because that's really important for us as the event organizers to be able to see like how much impact did our social media campaign have, et cetera. For everybody else that wants to stick around for my speedy rundown on things that you can do to advocate as an individual and as a nonprofit, then hang in, because that's what we're up to next. And again, as I'm talking, please feel free to drop anything that's on your mind into the chat, and we will still have some time to get back for a little more discussion at the end. So, all right, here we go. Apologies for the congestion. I thought I was over my cold and I dared to drink a chai latte, and that was a terrible mistake. So my apologies, but here we go. New England Museum Week. Last but far from least, Vermont and New Hampshire, we are really, really excited to have you here on Friday to be talking about why it is always important to be contributing to museums advocacy. So we've heard already about things like relief package distribution and making sure that we're thanking people for the impact that various grants have had in the last couple of years, et cetera. Budget questions, education policy questions, tax policy questions, those are the eternal three. They happen all the time. It's always important to be paying attention to those. Right now, of course, as restrictions are easing and people are looking at revitalizing, areas that have suffered from lack of tourism and regular business and things like that, it's really important that cultural organizations have a seat at the table for discussing how to bring downtown areas back to life and that kind of thing. So you should be checking out to see what's happening in your region that you can get involved with that. Of course, this year also is going to have midterm federal elections. So if you have even the barest inkling that you might want to be doing something to do with voter education or voter registration this year, you definitely want to be paying attention to that. And a whole bunch of states in the region this year are having legislative and gubernatorial elections. So many good reasons to be participating in 2022, including those 108 educational gag orders across 30 states that we were just talking about that are happening right now. So that all can feel really overwhelming when you're kind of staring down the face of like, how do I get involved? And I am here to give you a little confidence boosting to tell you, you already know how to do a whole lot of this, because advocacy is just on the sliding scale of the ways we already interact with the general public. So, very most basic level, public relations. Hi, we're here, we exist, this is what we're up to. Next, more involved is education, where you're teaching people about a topic related to your mission. Advocacy is also education. It's just a slightly more specialized form of education where you're talking about, this is where our organization and our mission intersects with public life and public policy. And, these are how these two things impact each other. And then the word that scares people, lobbying, is actually not that much scarier either, because if advocacy is all about education and telling people, these are the facts of the matter, these are the impacts, these are the causes, this is why it matters. Lobbying is just taking that one extra step to say, and this is what we would like you to do about it. And in most states, you can, in fact, reach out to your members and say, we hope you will support people who support these issues at the polls when you go to vote. You can say, reach out to your elected officials and say, this is the impact that this policy has on our organization, and we really hope you will either vote for or vote against it, depending on what the issue is. You do not have to register as a lobbyist to do that. The general rule of thumb, and it does vary a little from state to state, so you do want to take a quick look to see what the rules are in New Hampshire and Vermont. But in general, if you are spending less than 10% of your time at work directly talking to elected people and their representatives, their staff members, et cetera, then you do not have to register as a lobbyist and you are not in trouble. So, advocacy is a major part of my job. I don't spend 10% of my life talking to elected officials. I'm not a registered lobbyist, so you certainly don't have to worry about it. So the one thing you do have to remember as a nonprofit is that you can talk about issues till you're blue in the face, but you cannot talk about specific people. So you can say, like, this is really important, this issue impacts us, we hope you will pay attention to this when you go to the polls, but you cannot say, and therefore we really want you to vote for this person and not that person. Like, you have to stay completely nonpartisan, you have to stay away from mentioning people as much, like, flat out, don't talk about people unless you are doing something like, you can do candidate engagement, you can send out a questionnaire full of questions that have to do with issues that are important to your organizations. And then when you get those questionnaires back, you just have to make sure that you publish all of them. You cannot selectively edit them. You cannot only put out a few of them, and you cannot tell people what to think once they've read them. So you can just publish them all. If you send out surveys to 4 candidates in a race and only 2 of them come back, you can turn around and publish them and say, we sent questionnaires to all 4 of the candidates. These are the folks who answered, and this is what they said. And you can say, these issues are important to our organization because we hope you will consider that when you go to the polls. Just don't tell them who you think they should vote for, because that's not allowed. You can also be, say, like a site for a rally or a campaign event or whatever, but again, you have to remain nonpartisan. So if one candidate from one party wants to have an event at your organization and you get contacted the next week by an opposing party, if you say yes to one, you have to say yes to the other. So those are the major rules to remember as a nonprofit. If you are advocating as an individual, you can mention that you belong to a specific nonprofit and that you as an individual constituent really care about this thing. But if you want to make sure that you're separating yourself from whatever stance your organization has, you've got to make sure that you are advocating from your own accounts, your own email, your own social media, and you need to do it on your own time. And that can be lunch break, any other kind of break. If you work flex time and such is still within what some people would consider normal work hours, but they're not your work hours, that's also fine. And if multiples of you are advocating from the same organization, make sure you talk to each other first so that you're not muddying the waters. Make sure everybody is conveying the same message. Fortunately, most places are getting back to having at least some level of in-person contact. Most state houses are reopening and everything. So it is possible to go to your local, your federal representatives usually have a local branch office. You can go there and see people, but these kinds of contact are also still very prevalent right now and still very effective. Social media is still really important. Make sure if you're tweeting at people, you actually use their handle so you get their attention. Use some relevant hashtags to make it findable and shareable, just not so many that it's just a big wall of blue, because people just tend to glaze over and not read that. Images are, of course, also eye-catching, one of those social media constants. So we've got a really good example here from House of Seven Gables from last year, where they're, tapping into their mission and their history, and they're being very specific, and they're using the event hashtags, etc. Participating in virtual town halls and listening sessions, super important. Get yourself signed up for the newsletters that are coming out of your public officials' offices. Add their kind of general contact info to your mailing list so they know what you're up to. You can email folks, you can call the office, you can try to set up a virtual meeting. All of those still matter. And again, this is not as overwhelming as you think it is, because it's stuff you already know how to do. An effective advocacy pitch is just like an exhibit label. You want to use your punchiest, most memorable, most easy to understand statistics and statements. So give them comparisons and reference points where they can kind of hang their hat on, okay, I understand what the cost of a stamp is. And if the funding for this program is less than the cost of a stamp per person, then obviously that's not enough. That kind of reference point is super important, and it helps to give big context to what you're saying. Here's a number I really like. In 2017, AAM did a public opinion poll where they found that 96% of voters say they support government funding for museums. That's a great number. It's very effective. But it's also important to remember that while context is good and important, the power of your story is in your details. So you want to be specific, you want to be personal, you want to be informative, and you want to be timely. So if you're telling a story from 5 years ago, that's a lot less effective than a story from the last 2 years, because as we all know, the world has changed rapidly in the last 5 years. That being said, a longevity story can also be really impactful depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. For instance, like the long-term success of the Museums for All program through IMLS and the Association of Children's Museums. That was last year's number, and this year's number is even more impressive. So we have the updated infographic you can download and share from our website on the New England Museum Week page that I shared in the chat earlier. You do not need to start from scratch. Not only do we have shareable graphics pre-created for you, but we've also got some templates that you can personalize and use for yourself. Things like our Work Your Words worksheet will give you the structure to do a 3 to 5 sentence impact statement style, like this is where I'm coming from, this is what's going on, this is why it matters, and this is what I want you to do about it. We've also got actual impact statement templates for 4 different kinds of impact statements you might want to create: economic impact, educational impact, environmental impact, and an equity-centered impact statement. Those are all available for you to be able to download and work with. And I also did an entire session in advocacy camp on how to do a great impact statement. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, you can watch the recording on our website. You're also never, ever alone. In addition to our fabulous partners who are here talking to you today and NEMA ourselves, there are a lot of other resources out there for you to do advocacy who will provide you with background information, useful statistics, etc. And we have been sharing some of those resources in the Museums Advocacy and Doing Museum Week hashtags, not only this week, but in the weeks leading up to today's event. So if you scroll backwards through Twitter on a couple of those hashtags, you'll find some great and useful information that you can turn around and use yourselves. One important reminder, especially when you're doing text-based advocacy over social media, and say if you're writing emails to your legislators, et cetera, 3 A's are super important. Making sure that you watch your attitude. We want to try to stay positive as possible. It's very easy for language to be misinterpreted when you don't have vocal inflections behind it. So, choose your words carefully. Think about your audience, because social media advocacy can just as easily go to your members as to your direct contact with legislators. So think about what kinds of information and what kinds of asks are going to be most appropriate depending on who you're talking to. So, maybe you want to ask your members to write a thank you to your state or federal level officials for things like funding for the humanities, because some program that they love and participated in was funded through that, et cetera. Maybe you want to be asking them to tell you their stories and favorite memories of when they were school kids coming on a field trip to your organization, et cetera. Help you tell, again, those kind of longevity stories. And when you're thinking about reaching out to your legislators themselves, when you're framing your ask, you want to do a little research first and make sure you know really who it is you're talking to. Think about looking at their committee assignments and scan their social media feeds, see what's important to them right now, what are they talking about, and that will help you frame your approach to them so that you get their attention. My favorite story is I talked to a state legislator in Massachusetts who was, as far as I could tell, only ever interested in Little League baseball and small business. And, I walked in there saying I was representing museums and I was one of his constituents. He was literally staring out the window. And I said, did you realize that, you say museums here in the greater Boston area, the things people tend to think of are the Museum of Science and the aquarium and the MFA Boston and things like that that are gigantic. But, 80% of museums are actually small businesses. He actually sat up, stopped looking out the window and turned to pay attention to me. So just one little bit of pre-knowledge can make a huge difference in whether or not you get people's attention. And also make sure that you yourself are in your communications, because your passions and your fears are super compelling, and can really make for a better story. The other thing to remember is that advocacy is a long, slow game of building relationships, and you should be treating any contact that you have this week as just a stepping stone to building a further relationship. So if you tweet at one of your public officials and you get a like or a response from their office, then follow up next week with an email and say, thanks so much for engaging with us last week during New England Museum Week. I wanted to follow up with an invitation to come visit our site. We've got this program coming up. Would love it if you came and said hello, either virtually or in person, that kind of thing. Find out if there's anything you can do to help their office. Do they need any kind of on the ground stories about particular programs that they're supporting, et cetera, that would help them further convince their colleagues, and make sure that you're thanking them privately and publicly for their support, because that not only helps us, but it helps our partners like, the humanities councils that help fund all of our awesome programs, et cetera. And here's my favorite number for the day. It is almost 10:30, and now 100% of you have all you need to get out there and start being fabulous advocates. So we have a minute left here to say, does anybody have any final thoughts or questions? If so, feel free to speak up. If not, then I'm just going to say thank you one more time for being here today. And if anyone is interested in getting involved with further advocacy activities, we here at NEMA are recruiting some citizen members of the NEMA universe to become part of our advocacy committee with members of the NEMA staff and the NEMA board. So if that's something that intrigues you, please feel free to email me, and my email is in the chat, but also easy to find on the NEMA website. So there we go. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Michael and Agnes and everybody else for being with us today. It was terrific to talk about museums and what's going on in your particular necks of the woods. Good seeing you all.
All right.
Thanks. Bye.
Good day.